They're older sailors. Well, what would happen is a lot of people would just take all of their time at once and take the summer off, or take a month or two in the summer off. And that's why it sort of made an opening for people like me. First time I sailed, I was only 16 years old. I couldn't do anything, other than chip paint with a chipping gun and paint it over again. And then.
Did you get seasick at all?
No, I never got seasick.
Did it rock?
Oh yeah. I was in the middle of a hurricane once. The hurricane, I think it was 1962 or 63. It was Arlene, and Arlene didn't really touch the States. Right. I think it did.
Did you rope yourself on when you're on top, or you didn't go up top?
I wrote a story about it. The guy that I worked for was I worked for two memorable men when I was in the Merchant Marine. One of them was a guy named Pinky. We called him Pinky anyway. He was a squat little guy who was the chief bosun's mate, and he hated having summer hires. So what he did was he divided up all of these ordinary seamen like me, sometimes as many as 10 or 12 were sailing on the ship. And he divided them amongst the able-bodied seamen who were his regular sailors. And they had the responsibility for taking care of our work details and stuff. At somebody's phone.
No, it was TV.
Oh. And the second memorable guy, was a guy named Harold, and he looked more like a preacher than a seaman. He had a somber look. He was, protruding Adam's apple. He was balding and he was soft-spoken. But he was our boss, and he did things differently. All of the ordinary seamen who came to work for him in the summer all worked for him. So he did things like he taught us how to do knots to use for ships. Of course, I forgot all of that. He tried to do that, and he tried to help us in that way. And he's the one that suggested that I should go up to the bridge and try to steer the ship, because whoever was the mate and the able-bodied seaman there, they would surely allow it, because they were always there, and watching, so that I didn't steer it into the tip of Florida or so. But I recall doing it on the Pennsylvania Sun, and what happened was that I went up and I said I'd like to steer the ship, and they said sure, and they told me exactly what to do. And then both the officer of the watch and the able-bodied seaman who was working with him, they left the
Took
bridge.
Off.
They went to the chart room, because they were doing a chart for making the turn around Florida, and then the approach to Texas. So there I was for about 15 or 20 minutes steering this ship. And of course, I'm sure they didn't do it, but I grasped that wheel as if it was my life depended on it, right? And every time, there was a little marker that kept telling you whether you were on course or off course, or whether you were drifting this way and that way. And the moment it drifted one way, I would compensate. I never looked at the sea. I never had a wonderful experience seeing all of this stuff. I was focused on that little pointer that was above me.
Thanks, Joey, for that representation. Very nice.
But he was the guy during Hurricane Arlene. He gave us, when Hurricane Arlene was about to hit, and we were in the path of it, he said, okay, tomorrow, what we're going to do today is rig lines. We're going to rig lines along the main decks for people who had any business to go outside. They would be able to hold on to these lines. And there was a catwalk that was about 25 feet up in the air that ran down the middle of the ship. And that's what most people did. They would walk on the catwalk to get from the after house to the midships, right, where some of the work had to be done. So when the hurricane hit, we were full of oil. So the ship was very, very low in the water. And when in calm seas, it was very, very steady. You know, there wasn't much rocking and rolling because the ship was full of oil. But during Hurricane Arlene, it was rocking and it was rolling. It was doing, you know, it was doing those kind of things and these kind of things and these kind of things. And everybody got seasick. Now, I was one of those people that never got seasick. So that morning when we were trying to, when we met to determine what we were going to do that day, our boss, who we always called boss, he said, look, I know you know, half the crew was still in bed. Half of them were still in bed suffering from seasickness. So he said, here are the jobs we need to have done. We need to do some line splicing, which was going and putting hooks and eyes in lines for ships handling, right? These are those big, thick lines that they used for ship handling back in the 60s. We're going to do that, and the rest of you could just keep the deck hallways in the afterhouse clean. So the smart ones went right for those jobs. That was usually a one-man job, but on that day when Hurricane Arlene was about to hit,
cleaning it.
it was,
Wasn't there water?
all of the stuff had been secured beforehand, but there were a lot of stuff, you know, moving around. You're right. There was a lot of water. There were pots and pans from the mess hall. There was shards from mugs that had fallen out of a rack. So he had 4 or 5 of the 7 of us just doing that. So the smart ones, they scattered and said, okay, I'm going to take the upper deck and I'm going to take this thing, and you never saw them again. For all I know, they probably just went back to their racks and took a nap, you know. But I wasn't smart enough for that, so I was going to go to the midships with our boss and help him to splice lines and do that kind of stuff. So I started to climb the stairway to go up to the second deck where you could get access to that catwalk that was 20 feet up in the air, and it had handrails. I think it was made of aluminum, but it had handrails and things so that you could inch